I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be talking to the wonderful Carrie Coon all about the movie His Three Daughters. And I wanted to start by talking about the opening monologue because I feel like that gives us such a distinctive idea of who Katie is right from the offset. You know, the way that she's running through these lines and she's asking questions but not pausing and waiting for an answer. And Aza, who's your writer and director on this movie, it sounds like he was very specific in the script about how he was going to film it with you against just a blank backdrop and not cutting away from you. And I was curious in having those details, how that really helped you to prepare and understand what that needed to be.
Mostly it was just intimidating because in TV and film, you rely on the fact that there's an edit and that there are ways for them to cut away from something that's not working. So to know that those initial speeches, Elizabeth's included, were going to be just straight through without cutting away, just meant you had to prepare as though you were preparing for a play. Well, you prepare for anything, but that. And also, the rhythm was so specific. And in the 2 days of rehearsal we had, Aza was very particular about the orchestra of the three. I mean, we sound different. And I think when Aza talks about having us in mind when he wrote the film, I think what he's actually thinking more about, more than personality, was actually rhythm. And so Katie's responsibility is, in fact, to just go all out. And even in that second speech where he has that shot where Natasha cracks the door open and is looking at me and you don't see my face, he just said, I want you to deliver it as fast as you can, almost without taking a breath. So it was very technical, actually. And yeah, intimidating. Also because I respect Lizzie and Natasha so much. And I'm kicking off the whole movie because we shot in order. You don't want your co-stars to think that you're coming up short.
But it sounds like he was so specific about the framing throughout, and I love that detail and the fact that we don't see all three of you in frame together at the beginning because they're not properly seeing each other at that point, and then
Right.
gradually they all come together. And how does working with a director that has such a distinctive idea of how to use the setups to really tell a story in that way help on your side with the performance?
Well, arbitrariness is the death of art always. You never want to have someone who's making arbitrary decisions in charge of art making. It's very disconcerting. So whenever you have someone that confident, where everything is laid out so clearly, you're absolutely right. There's a roadmap for how this thing is going to unfold. And I think what it meant is that there was no hiding. We weren't going to have all these different sizes of coverage. So we always had to be prepared to just inhabit the thing emotionally and truthfully. Whenever the camera was rolling, we were shooting on film. Nothing is wasted, and and really, the beauty of what Aza did is that we told the story in order. So we also benefited from learning about each other as the story went on and becoming more intimate, just as the sisters are also deepening their relationship. And what's brilliant about the way he structured it is that it mirrors the experience the audience is having. As you pointed out, we encounter the sisters as they see each other at their most stereotypical. And then that gets fragmented. And the first time you see them in the same frame is during the obituary scene, which is almost, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the film.
And in playing Katie as well, she feels like someone who processes her emotions by tension a lot of ways. And I was very curious about how you found the ways that you wanted that tension to really manifest and exhibit itself, because obviously it's a very heightened version of it at this point as well.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's in the language. I think the tension is built into the language, and any release you experience in Katie is also built into the language. There is a release, for example, near the end with Natasha. And so naturally, I think what follows is the body, if you're actually inhabiting that thing correctly, or not correctly, but the way it's laid out on the page. Um, so I didn't feel like I was very conscious about that. But what I was aware of that I loved about Aza's writing is that she is very controlling, she's very responsible, but she's so emotionally immature that when she's relating to her sisters, she's never seeing the person who's in front of her. She's only seeing her idea of that person. And in fact, talking at the idea of that person. And when you're on the receiving end of that behavior, it's very infuriating. And I was moved by Katie's immaturity, actually. It makes her so, it's such a contradiction to the opening, to what you think she's going to be. And so when she says that line, when she says, but he was our dad, you already had a dad. It's the most frightfully immature thing a grown person can say. And you get a glimpse into just how childish she really is. And that's just an example of all of the moments in the script that felt so real. And even though it's heightened, the dynamics just felt so recognizable.
Do you think that emotional immaturity that you're talking about there is also part of why she really tries to be the person to set the ground rules and to set this space of order? Because if she can do that, then that's a way of showing I know what I'm doing and I know how to control and organize everything because it's such a juxtaposition to the emotional side of her.
Yes, I mean, certainly I find emotionally immature people usually don't know that that's what they are. They think they are that responsible older sibling. They think everything would fall apart without their intervention. So I don't think Katie has that much self-awareness, honestly. Um, but it's definitely a recognizable way people cope with grief and challenge. Oh, hello, Kitty. I'm sure that's not the first time that's happened.
Nope.
You feature often, I'm sure, in the podcast.
There's also something so relatable in terms of how Katie approaches this processing of grief in
Mhm.
trying to do things and to turn it into actions. You know, the obsession over getting the DNR signed. I'm going to get groceries. I'm going to cook for everybody. And so, how did you find the actions were a way of her really expressing how she's feeling because she obviously can't compute those emotions traditionally?
So much of that I found fascinating was in the script. There's a moment where Katie is cleaning up a broken mug on the floor, and that's in the script. And it's brilliant. Aza understands that as actors, we really like to have something to do. Behavior communicates a lot of attitude. And it's a very visual way of communicating point of view. And in film, it's a visual medium. This isn't a novel, this isn't a play. And Aza was very intentional about writing those actions in. Even things cutting the carrots, drinking the wine. I mean, all of that is also scripted. And he gave Katie action because of that frenetic energy she's bringing into the picture, and it's all in there. It's all in the script. And so I love it. I love having something to do. I'm forever asking for a prop, or on Gilded Age I always have a teacup, I always have gloves, I'm always doing something, just because otherwise it's very stand and deliver. So I was grateful that Ozza had supplied so much of that already in the screenplay.
I also think in the screenplay as well, it's so evident that the writing has that motion of dialogue, but also it allows for restraint and it allows the characters to really sit there and process emotions or to sit there in silence because they're disagreeing with one another, and those silences mean just as much as the things that they do say. And so, how did just even the punctuation of the script really help you?
Yes. Well, Ozza talks about having a color-coded chart when he was deciding on the shots. He gave each of us a color, and he would know, for example, how many shots he needed in the scene because of our, like, how often we were speaking and who he wanted to end a scene on. And so he actually color coded. It's almost, and it looks like music. And so I think, again, so much of it was really intentional. Ozza first wanted to make sure that we were distinct in our rhythms, which that was why he hired us. Our rhythms were already distinct, but he was very specific about how quickly he wanted something to move. But then likewise, he would often say, "Oh no, this pause is longer." He would extend a moment. And the result, of course, is that those pauses signify as much as the language and sometimes more. And so the other thing in terms of the rhythm of the piece and the punctuation, he was very smart about the heart monitor was always in the background. And sometimes it's very present and sometimes it's completely gone. But that rhythm of the heart monitor was a really important part of the piece. Because what he's capturing, of course, is in this pre-grieving period, we step out of time. Everybody puts their lives on hold and steps into this liminal space where they're waiting for something and they have no idea when it's going to happen. And so all of the rituals of your life are dispensed with, and then you create this new temporary ritual. And I that was his intention behind the sort of the way the piece moves. And I think you really feel that. And I find that people who have had the experience of sitting this kind of vigil really relate to this film because of it.
Absolutely. And like even with you were just saying the constant presence of the heart monitor. And I heard that that was something that he actually had the sound playing during some of the rehearsal period that you had beforehand. And so how did even just the experience of sitting there and listening to that constant beeping really help in understanding just that presence and that foreboding sense that it gives you?
He often would say, we would often be doing a scene and getting caught up in it, and he would say, remember, you still hear that sound, and your dad is in that room. And the rooms in that apartment, it was a real rent controlled New York apartment. So the rooms are really close together. And so you understand how you could overhear your phone call or someone singing in the room. And it was so, it's first principles of acting. What are the given circumstances? And the given circumstances that our father is dying in the next room. Well, as an actor, sometimes it's hard to hold on to that stuff when you're thinking of all the other considerations in a scene. And he was just always smart about bringing us back to that reality of what we were actually doing there.
As you were going through that rehearsal period, what were some of the places where you really wanted to be able to dive deeper into some of the scenes and just really figure out some of the elements of Katie?
We didn't have a lot of time, and often sitting around a table is helpful because we were able to establish just some basic biographical details, some events, just like the timeline of events. But when you're actually in the scenes, none of that stuff really factors in. And so I don't know that when you only have 17 days to shoot something, you know, that you just have to concentrate on the scene that's right in front of you. And like I say, he always had such simple actions in there that were scripted in, Katie is serving soup, right? Um, and that, so what you figure out in the kind of mini rehearsal before we actually shoot is just sort of a basic sequence of those events you can hang your hat on and then let the emotional fragility play out over that. And I mean, that's kind of the work, I guess. But again, everything was so specific.
Which is always an amazing gift. And
Mhm.
did you find that specificity of what you were just talking about? I loved that point of that the rhythms completely change during that pre-grieving process, because it's so true. It's certain things feel like they're dragging on and taking days, but it's been hours, and certain things just feel so rushed and like there's not enough time for them. And so
Yes.
did you find that that specificity was really created for you in finding this different rhythm for Katie from her day to day?
The benefit of it was that because we were shooting in order, we had an actual memory of the thing that had happened the night before that we were then reckoning with. And so, whatever that moment had been, fast or slow or chaos or connection, it absolutely led to the next thing. And so, by building that story in order, we were able to be surprised by the end, by each other, surprised by where we found ourselves on the couch, the position we found ourselves in, the response we were having to our father. That all unfolded in real time as it was happening, as though the rest of the movie had been building up to that moment. And I just think I can't underestimate the power of shooting in order and what you learn when you get to do that.
It's amazing. And I think there's also in these sorts of circumstances, there's such a pressure cooker to everything that's going on. And especially when tension arises from not leaving the house.
Mhm.
The only person that ever leaves the house is Natasha to go outside and smoke because she's been forced to by Katie.
Right.
And so for you and Lizzie, your characters never leave those four walls once they step into it. And so for you, how did that add just even more layers of some of the tension that exist?
Well, of course, we were actually doing that. We were in that apartment 12, 14 hours a day. The beauty of it too, I have to point out that our production design was extraordinary. That apartment was freshly painted and a young family was getting ready to move in. So every detail you see was applied by our production designer, and it really feels like the accumulation of years of someone in a space. And so the space felt very specific and very alive. And the more time we spent in it, the more detail you would discover. I mean, even just the mugs, the cookware, there were Tic Tacs in a dish we kept eating and they had to replace them to match. Just the little tchotchkes on the shelves. I mean, all of that stuff just felt had so much personality. And it was all, and the artwork, I mean, everything was put there. The only thing that existed in the space that I think really impacted us was that teeny narrow wall that ends up being a character really in that scene where Lizzie's trying to take a moment and Natasha comes in. It's my favorite scene in the movie. And the other effect it created that mirrored our experience is that any of the actors who came into the space, the nurse, Angel, they all felt like an intrusion, and you kind of felt the shift in energy that there was a new person, because of course we were there with the crew many hours a day, and then this new face would come in and shift everything. And so it mirrored what the experience would have been like if we were really sitting vigil in an apartment. And then likewise, even though J.O. Sanders hadn't actually been in the back room, by the time he actually got there at the end of the shoot to do his speech, it felt like he'd been in that room all along. And so he didn't feel like an intrusion. So the claustrophobia of shooting in an actual New York apartment really created that feeling. And yes, it didn't require a lot of imagination, I would say.
And it is such a great point as well about the moment that someone else steps in, how does that change the fabric? And it does it in very different ways. There's the moment where Angel, who's one of the nurses who's there every day, is like, maybe it's today, maybe it's today. And then he leaves. And they kind of all use that to bring out the humor of like, your character, I think, calls him Angel of Death and is like, he says the same thing every day, and it's if anyone else had been saying that, wouldn't have worked, but like they're all a team in that moment because they have someone else to project it towards. And
Mhm.
so how did you feel like that gave a great moment of levity and humor to really be able to bring out in Katie?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were certainly, again, because we were telling the story in order, we were hungry for some connection, even if it was over something caustic. And one of my favorite elements of that particular scene is the fact that Lizzie, as the youngest sister, is trying to find a way in. She's criticizing the humor that we're finding and, the irony of this announcement that keeps coming over and over, but never comes to fruition. And so I love her trying to penetrate it. It gives me such compassion as a sister to see the youngest trying to fit in and then being not quite successful. And so I just that again, some of that dynamic is one of the ones that just felt so real to me.
There's also something so interesting in watching your character have this moment of her emotions coming to the surface and breaking a little bit in front of one of the other stuff, Mirabelle, that comes in when she hasn't been able to do that in front of her own sisters and her own family. And for you, why did it feel like that was the person and the place that it was possible? Because it's also this ridiculous moment where it's right as she's trying to leave the apartment door.
Yes. Oh, I mean, it's so self-absorbed. It's so self-absorbed. Again, unlikable, real. And it's just such a relatable moment. Yes, here's this poor woman who's been working all day and all she wants to do is leave. And this white woman is holding her hostage with her drama, trying to explain away, what happened in the apartment and apologize for it. It's like, don't you think this woman has seen it all, watching these families go through this experience, and to just not take into account someone else's experience and trying to kind of excuse yourself from something that was embarrassing is so, again, it's quite immature, but it's actually absolutely familiar too, because we don't when these spiky fractious relationships are being forced toward a reckoning inside this space with this huge loss impending, naturally those she can't be fully expressed with her sisters, and so it comes out sideways, and that poor nurse is on the receiving end of it. And who among us hasn't had a moment like that?
There's also an aspect of her life that goes back to something you were talking about earlier in terms of you essentially are putting your life on hold and entering into this place of limbo, but that doesn't stop your life outside from existing. And we see the phone calls, we see the moments where she's trying to call her teenage daughter, and the struggles that she's having in connecting to her daughter still exist, and they're still there, and she still feels the responsibility to wake up and try to get everybody to school, but she's not even physically there. And do you think she's someone who resents the fact that she always has to be the person to put everything in motion, but also secretly really loves that everybody looks to her in that way as well?
Hmm. I think there's a definition of love wherein some people learn that they will receive love if they are able to provide something in return, some service, some helpfulness. They make themselves indispensable. And if they make themselves indispensable, then they will be loved. And I think that's an aberrant understanding about what love actually is, but it's a very common one, especially in homes that are a little broken or alcoholic homes, which certainly the implication is that Katie is struggling with that. I think it would be not a small leap to assume that Vincent probably had his own version and maybe the moms did. It's usually a family disease. And so, yes, I think the idea that you are at once desperate to make yourself indispensable and resentful of it at the same time because you think it doesn't allow you to be anything else. I mean, they're both a kind of egotism, actually. There's nothing humble about that, about thinking that people can't survive without you. And also that they're forcing you to be a certain way. Again, doesn't take into account anyone else's experience, but I just find that a really familiar person.
No, it's such a great description of exactly what that is for her as well. I love it. You were also touching upon the scene where the three of them kind of all come together and trying to write their dad's obituary, and I think again it's such a recognizable thing of reconciling with what was my relationship with this person and how much did I really know, and you see Katie struggling to think about things beneath the surface that don't just feel like a list of roll calls of he liked this and he liked that. What did you find to be her perspective and that experience for her in terms of, I feel like I know my dad, but also do I know him at the same time?
I mean, I think the reality is, do you ever know anyone? And is the premise the film is putting forth, maybe ever so slightly true, that maybe you only know them once they're absent, or maybe you only consider them once they're truly absent? We take for granted the people in our lives. I mean, how many of us have sat and thought, oh, I should have asked that question, but I was too self-absorbed. I wasn't thinking about um, my parents or my grandparents. That's not the purview of youth. We're not reflecting in that way. And we're always defining ourselves in relation to those, into our parents, and who we want to be and who we don't want to be and how we want to be like them and not like them, differentiating ourselves. And that's not usually cause for much introspection. And so it is often after it's too late that we start to think of all the things we should have said or done. But I think that how to encapsulate any human life in a matter of paragraphs is, it's an impossible task. And I think obituaries, like deathbed conversations, are almost always unsatisfying and always will be. And, in some ways, I guess Rachel's cutting through some BS, maybe a less conventional list, but yeah, at the end of the day, it is still the same. It's still just kind of a summary, and language is inadequate to express the breadth of a human life, no matter how mundane it might appear.
Absolutely. One of the other scenes that I wanted to ask you about was the moment where Benji pushes back on her, because I thought that was really interesting to see how she just kind of sits there and recoils and just absorbs it. But then what is that moment, which is the breaking point for her of you need to get out of this house right now and you can't
Yeah.
stand there and you can't talk to me like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jovan's really brilliant in that scene. I've known Jovan since The Leftovers. He was kind of just starting out then, so it was really joyful to get to come together and work with him again, and for him to get to put me in my place. Um, I think it is about the assertion of familiarity. It's a competition. It's the same thing Katie says to Rachel. You already had a dad, and he was our dad, and here is this stranger ostensibly saying that I knew him better than you did, and I spent more time with him than you did, and of course openly criticizing her with information she didn't know. She didn't know what the apples were for, but she didn't ask. And so she lashes out because, that is fundamentally an indictment of the accusations she's been making. And rather than turn inward and say, "Hi, I hadn't really thought of it like that," the alcoholic is going to just tell somebody to get out of the room. That's not an introspective moment for somebody like Katie. It's going to take her a lot longer to process something like that, and a lot longer to apologize. And the apology won't be satisfying.
I mean, it's so true that her apology isn't satisfying, and there's something so beautiful about it being received as, I know this is the best that you can do with the tools that you have emotionally.
Exactly
And so
right.
when it came to playing that apology that she does give, how did you want to go into that with the idea in mind of this is someone, like you said, who's very emotionally immature?
Well, again, like the apology is inadequate on the page. It's the way it's written. And so the scene really is then about how Rachel receives it, and that the way it lands then is in Natasha's hands. And that's what's great about having the kind of scene partners I have in that movie, is that it's not really my job to communicate that. It's actually in the way it's received that tells that story. And that's the best part of acting. That's when you're with people like that.
I love that point. And also you were touching upon the fact that, for Katie as well, there's so much of the dialogue where she's like, my father, my father, my father, and she really reviews Natasha's character as, that wasn't your dad. This was someone who was a parental figure in your life, but he's my dad. And then there is that acquiesced that she gives of, no, he was all of our fathers. And she kind of finally gets it and understands it. And so what was the vulnerability that you felt had to really crack open in her for her to finally understand something that she's clearly held on to and believed for decades?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's something that her father reiterates in that monologue, which of course is, not entirely realistic, but it's what her father chastises her for. And I suppose maybe the lesson there is that deep down inside, there are things we do know to be true. And for some reason, it costs us to admit them. And I think sometimes where we fall short is really sitting with what that cost is. Because of course it's not real. The cost, it doesn't actually cost anything. You're just operating from a model of scarcity, wherein if I have something, it's taking something away from someone else. And if they have it, it's taking something away from me. I don't think that's true. But it's a very challenging thing for people to admit, and or to sort of like to unearth the reason why what it's costing you is sometimes takes years for people to get to. And I just love that that there's nothing sentimental in this film. It's not saccharine. You understand that there is still work yet to be done. And I just keep coming back to crediting the language with that. I mean, it's all revealed in the way that Asa has written it. I just think it's in there, and I just did it. I just showed up and did it the way it was written. And it works because he's written such a tight and just very replete. The more personal a script is, the more generalizable it is.
Absolutely. I definitely see that specificity and that broadness. And I think in the way that people have responded to this film as well with their own experiences. And, you were bringing up, there's that scene towards the end where the father gets up and walks into the room. And obviously that scene isn't real, but the emotion of it is real. And the conversation is emotionally true for all of them. And so how did you think about the scope of the way to play that, where it's this unrealistic situation in in some sort of imagination, but actually the core of it is filled with so much truth for all three of them?
Well, the nice thing about a scene like that is that J.O. Sanders had to do all the talking, and that you as an actor get to be a good listener. And that's most of the job. I think acting is listening. I don't know who said it. I mean, it is real. I think that's true. You just get to just breathe through that moment and really enjoy someone else taking the reins from us. And again, because we told the story in order, there was also I think visceral understanding of how we were relating to each other physically in the space. It was all very organic because we'd been given the space to live through the story up until that moment. And so, there wasn't much conscious about it. We got to just live inside of it. And with all the knowledge we had accumulated in the 16 days prior, and then just enjoy, a really virtuoso actor handing us that beautiful ending. And yeah, I mean, it's just when it's good, it's like when these projects come together and they work, then they really are just a pleasure to execute.
And I kind of love the fact that it wasn't this meticulous planning of where is she going to end up emotionally, where is this space going to
Oh,
be for all three of them, because I think that's part of why it does feel so organic. Even just that shot of the three of them on the couch while Lizzie's singing the song about all the little ducks to all of them.
this sister we've underestimated ends up in the middle as the pillar. And I think, that's not where Katie would have thought she would have ended up on the couch. And yeah, it was just a gift not to have to think about that and just kind of find ourselves where we were supposed to be because of everything that had led up to that moment.
What was the experience in just kind of going into that final moment and that final day? Because there's kind of, I imagine, a feeling of just letting go and loss for the experience that you're having that you can parlay into it as well.
You said it. I mean, we were all realizing we were coming to the end of something that had felt very special, and it felt much longer than the time we had spent. And so all of that is in the experience. And isn't it great we didn't have to shoot that on day one before we knew each other and loved each other in that way. And because of the way we shot it, it could be really full, as you pointed out, of all of the whatever that experience means. And I always look upon invitations like a movie, whatever it's asking of me. I haven't lost my parents, but a film is asking us to enter those circumstances imaginatively. And I always feel like that's good work. I feel like that's good, honest, preparatory work for the challenges in your life that are coming. And so it's a gift to get to even just sit inside of those questions imaginatively for a while.
And lastly, I know that when you were between filming, that one of the things that the three of you did together quite frequently was all of the Queen Bee word puzzles from the New York Times. And so I just wanted to ask about like how many of those do you feel like you ended up doing across the course of the 18
Oh,
days?
we were queen bees every day. Okay. We were queen bees every day. And Natasha Leone, I mean, she designs crosswords. I mean, she's a crossword puzzle fanatic and she's a Wordle fanatic and the duo trigordle. I mean, she's really one of the smartest people I've ever met and one of the most well-read and prolific people I know. And so her vocabulary is insane. But Lizzie would always come through with a clutch word. Sometimes we'd reach out to my husband via text and just like put the lists together. But there were times where it did feel that making Queen Bee was more important than the movie. And Ozzy would have to say, we're making a movie over here, if anybody's interested. And so they were always relieved when we finally got to Queen Bee, because then we would concentrate again on what we were doing.
I love that. Well, it's such a stunning film, and every single time I watch it, I feel like I just see so much more in your performance. So
Thank
congratulations and
you
thank you
so
so much,
much.
Carrie.
Well, thank you for the conversation. I really appreciate it. And thanks for promoting the movie. It's a small one and it needs all the help it can get.